Namaste and welcome everyone to this chat today. And we have got Robert Spencer with us. Robert Spencer, whom everyone knows, it doesn't need any introduction. Welcome, Robert, and welcome, Vibhuti ji.
Thank
Always
you.
see
Thank
it.
you.
Now, I think the whole world is reeling at the pictures that are coming out of the Israeli border near Gaza Strip. But are you surprised? You found something new? You think it is something that has not happened before? Is it very much part of the playbook?
Just working from the same playbook they've worked from for years. This is something I've been warning about for over 20 years now. This is something that, of course, you have experienced in India many times, perhaps borne the brunt of it in terms of the virulence and violence of the attacks. This was a particularly violent attack in Israel on Saturday, but India has seen just as bad or worse. So have many other parts of the world throughout 1400 years of the history of jihad. I set this out in my book of the same name, The History of Jihad. Nobody should have been surprised by this, but many people were, because the ongoing sickness of the Western world and the non-Muslim world in general is a refusal to admit and acknowledge the nature, the reality, and the magnitude of Islamic jihad. And so it constantly blindsides them because they do not or will not understand what it's all about, what it's coming from, what their goals are, what their methodology is, what they're likely to do yet again in the near future.
Yes, I guess you're right, because if you read the Hamas charter, they have laid down their objective absolutely in clear terms, absolutely explicit. They say that obliteration of Israel is their goal. And actually, it is the first goal, because they also say that they are actually part of the Muslim Brotherhood. And ultimately, their goal is what is laid down in Quran 8.39.
Quran 8:39 says, fight them until persecution is no more and religion is all for Allah. Islamic apologists, when they're speaking to non-Muslims, they tend to stop after persecution is no more, and their explanation of the passage ignores the rest of it. So it sounds as if it's just defensive warfare, that if you're being persecuted, if the Muslims are being persecuted, you can fight them until the persecution ends. That's not where the verse ends. The passage continues and says, until religion is all for Allah. And that is the goal of the attacks in Israel on Saturday. That's the goal of the jihad versus India on an ongoing basis. It was summed up by Maulana Maududi, the Pakistani Islamic scholar and politician who died in 1979. And Maududi wrote an extensive commentary on the Quran, multi-volumes. And he was a very, very knowledgeable Islamic scholar. And he wrote, non-Muslims have absolutely no right to wield the reins of power in any part of God's earth. And if they do, the believers are under the obligation to dislodge them from that power by any means possible. So that means if there's a non-Muslim government or a government that does not follow Islamic law, there's an ongoing state of war against that government on the part of Islamic jihadis. And that's ultimately why they did this on Saturday and why they attack everywhere else. They want to rule the entire world and to dislodge all the non-Muslim governments. And so they commit these acts of violence in order to weaken and destabilize those governments, to strike terror, also per the Quran, in the hearts of their enemies and make them afraid to resist, so that ultimately they're primed for submission.
I think Al-Baqarah 2.254 makes it absolutely clear. It's explicit. It says the kafir is the persecutor, oblique oppressor.
Yes, and see,
Al-kafirun hu al-zalimun.
It's just by virtue of being a kafir, by being an unbeliever, you're an oppressor. So many times Islamic apologists, because they're very clever, diabolically clever, you could say. And so they speak to non-Muslims who are ignorant of Islam, and they say, the Quran allows for fighting, but it's only fighting against oppression. And people think, oh, well, fighting against oppression, who could argue with that? I'm against oppression myself. More power to you. And they don't realize that what they mean by oppression is any non-Muslim government.
Yes, oppression is variously defined. I think 29.68, it says that if you do not accept Allah's commands, that's oppression, injustice against the believers. 32.22, all of them actually, oppression means not following or not being a believer. That's oppression.
Exactly.
And persecution is what is defined in 5.32 and 5.33.
Mm-hmm. The oppression is to make war against Allah and His Messenger. But you can be making war against Allah and His Messenger without even realizing it, because you're just going about your life as a non-Muslim, and you have your priorities and your perspectives as a non-Muslim, and then you find, to your horror, that some of the Muslims consider that to be oppression and persecution of the Muslims. In Pakistan, this happens to the non-Muslims quite frequently, that Hindus or Christians are approached and made to acknowledge that Muhammad is a prophet. And if they refuse, then they are insulting Muhammad and oppressing the Muslims. And so they can be brutalized and killed. And this is not just, unfortunately, only happening in Pakistan either.
Vibhuti-ji?
Yeah, I mean, this is you, Sanjay ji. You have definitely picked up a very important element as part of what we call Shatru Bodh, knowing your enemy, and Purv Paksh, doing your research on your past of knowing the enemy as part of the deal. I urge everybody who is watching it to read the Hamas covenant, because unless and until you know that, you do not know who you are dealing with, and then we are operating from the position of ignorance. What Robert was talking about, a lot of people do not even know what it says. So in the part of knowing it, and I went through all the 36 articles. A couple of them stood out in reference to the modern context, and the context is very important. Is the fact that they reject any negotiated peace settlement. They say in the charter, reject any negotiated peace settlement, because that is only an instrument to appoint an infidel to disturb your way of life. So if you are going to reject, now you realize that why so many agreements, whether Camp David or wherever all the Bill Clinton did, were rejected despite Palestinians getting over 80% of what they wanted. So this is a very important part. The other thing which I wanted to mention is, I was surprised. It is a good education that they say Islamic Waqf land is a holy possession land. So everything which is not Islamic they have to have that. So how does one deal with that scenario, with these kind of extremities, which the document itself says that it is Islamic resistance movement? So I'm putting through quite a few thoughts into this to seek your opinion. How does modern generation of people not know this? And if they know this, what do we do? Where do we go from here?
The modern generation doesn't know it because nobody's telling them. We're telling them now. The Hamas Charter has been there since, what, it was in 1988?
Yeah, that's right.
And yet...
Yeah. Hamas was established in 1987, yeah.
Okay, so if you look at every last analysis, every one, without exception, 100% of the conflict in Israel that comes from the United States government since 1987, how many of them do you think mention Islam and Jihad and the Islamic imperative to destroy Israel as delineated in the Hamas Charter? None of them. None. There is not a single analyst in Washington who has ever taken part in the negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian Arabs, who has ever made any public acknowledgement of the Islamic aspect of this conflict. Yet if you read the Hamas charter, the Islamic aspect is the only aspect. It's the whole, what
Yes.
the whole thing is about. And yet they routinely ignore it. And I would guarantee you that if I go out into Los Angeles and I ask people on the street right now, if I left and said, I'll be back in a half hour, I went out and asked 20 people on the street, what is the religious aspect of the war between Hamas and Israel? All of them, 100%, would say there isn't any. This has to do with land and occupation. And that's it. And they have no idea that there's not really any real occupation, that no negotiated settlement over land will ever solve this problem, because it is a religious conflict. And it's rooted in Islamic principles about how any land that belongs to Islam at one time or another belongs by right to Islam forever. The Quran says in chapter 2, verse 191, drive them out from where they drove you out. Now, it's commonly said nowadays that the Israelis drove the Arabs out. They did not, actually. That's a historical myth. But it is commonly understood among the Palestinian Arabs, and this makes a difference because it makes them believe that they have a responsibility before the one true God to drive out the people who drove them out. And there is no negotiation, no settlement, no agreement that will ever change that. That's a divine command that that many of them believe they have to obey.
Follow up of that. It's just 1 second, Sanjay ji.
Let me supplement this, Vibhuti ji.
Yeah.
What you said, I'm only supplementing that, and what Robert said. I'm reading from Article 7 of the Hamas Charter, and this is the last para, where it is quoting from Al-Bukhari and Muslim. These Muslim. The day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight the Jews. That is killing the Jews. When the Jew will hide behind stones and trees, the stones and trees will say, "O Muslims, O Abdullah, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill him." Only the gharka tree, a certain kind of tree, would not do that because it is one of the trees of the Jews. Now, where do we go from there?
Exactly. And to add to that, again, it is a very dangerous document because it is not written 2,000 years ago. It is written in 40 years or 50 years ago, and in which the preamble itself says, I'm reading the preamble of this one: Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it. So this is a warning sign for the rest of the people.
Hassan al-Banna, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it is a dangerous sign for us, and people, for pointing this out, you and I will be branded as Islamophobic. I'm not cooking it up. It's there in their charter made in 1988. Please read it. The question here is, how does this address this issue in the 21st century, where you see the worldwide agitation happening in support of Hamas? The Palestinian cause is gone with the wind, to quote the movie. It's gone with the wind. It's Hamas is directing the entire onslaught on civilized world in the manner that they are trying to do. If they are doing it in Israel, they will do it in India. It is the same ideology. So it is an ideological battle, and we get to, all those people who are seeking peace must figure it out, that it has to be contested. It can't be given up just like that. Robert.
That's about the size of it. The Palestinian cause has been mainstreamed in the West, at very least, by the adoption of it by the left, and the left has portrayed it as a struggle of an oppressed people for self-determination against a vicious occupying power. And people have only heard this side of the story. They've never heard the other side, and they certainly have never heard about the Islamic aspects. So, of course, they have no idea. And so we see leftists joining with the Muslims in cheering on these attacks all over the world because they think they're righteous in striking out against the evil occupier. Actually, Israel owns all that land. It was part of what was set aside by the League of Nations, which was the precursor to the United Nations, as a Jewish national home. And that's what Israel is. And so there really isn't any occupation at all. But nobody says this in the establishment media.
How does one play with this distorted narrative? Because in Article 11, they clearly say that the land is exclusive Muslim nature of area. The land of Palestine is Islamic waqf, holy possession. If that is the criterion, how does one negotiate, particularly when they say reject negotiated peace and settlements?
There
How
really
does one...
any negotiation. The negotiations have proceeded on the fiction that the Palestinian Authority of Mahmoud Abbas was moderate and did not believe the same things that Hamas believes.
Right.
Now, Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority have made it abundantly clear many times that they believe exactly the same things that you're reading from the Hamas Charter. And so it was a fiction to begin with that they ever presented a moderate alternative. But I'm sure we could go to Washington tomorrow and talk to many, many people who would say, oh yes, the Hamas is a bit out of control, but the Palestinian Authority, they're moderates and they're willing to make peace. And they completely ignore all the genocidal rhetoric and the rhetoric about destroying Israel entirely that comes from Fatah, which is an arm of the Palestinian Authority, and from the official Palestinian Authority press organs as well.
A very interesting point I find is in Article 12. In Article 12, they are quoting from 2.256, which is often quoted as the peaceful verse, but they have omitted the first sentence. And they actually start what the actual intent is. That says that now is the right direction manifestly distinguished from deceit. Whoever therefore shall deny taghut and believe in Allah, he shall surely take hold with a strong handle, which shall not be broken. Allah is he who heareth and seeth. Now, contrast this with the pains to which all the apologists go and say that, okay, it says that there is no compulsion in religion.
There's no compulsion in religion is one of the most popular passages of the Quran for non-Muslim analysts. As a matter of fact, we could publish the Quran for non-Muslim politicians. And it would
Okay.
Chapter 2, verse 256, there's no compulsion in religion. And chapter 5, verse 32, to kill one person is like killing the whole world. And I believe that's it. Is there? That might be all.
No, the Al-Kafirun also.
Oh, Kafirun, yes. Chapter 109 of the Quran in its entirety. Say to the unbelievers, I do not worship what you worship, and you do not worship what I worship, and I will not worship what you worship, and you will not worship what I worship. To you, your religion, and to me, mine. So tolerance.
Nobody tells the context, actually. What the context is totally different.
Indeed. In all the cases, the idea in Islam, it's very important to remember that Allah blesses obedience in this world, and he punishes disobedience in this world. There is hell, too, and paradise with the virgins. But in this world, you get punished and you get rewarded. And so this creates a tremendous temptation to fanaticism and violence, because Muhammad was asked at one point in a hadith, what is the best deed? What is a deed greater than jihad, rather? And he said, I can't think of one. So in other words, there's nothing greater than jihad, and jihad is warfare against unbelievers, so to conquer and subjugate them. So if you are worried about hellfire, you want to do a very great thing for Allah, then you commit jihad at violence. And you assume that you will be blessed in this world as well as in the next one. There's no idea that the righteous might suffer in Islam. And so if you have the righteous suffering, then you have to correct that and strike out even more, become even more fanatical, because obviously you weren't religious enough. And so Allah wants you to become even more religious. And this is what we see in Pakistan all the time. And it results in the blasphemy convictions and the mob violence and the killings because people are trying to please Allah and be righteous. And so you think that there's no compulsion in religion, and this means everybody is going to be tolerant and peaceful, when actually the idea is that the truth shines out from falsehood, which is the rest of the passage. That is something saying you're going to prosper in this world if you're righteous. And so it just leads to more jihad violence.
There's also this apology that is often issued. It says that, okay, jihad is peaceful struggle, 25.52.
Yes. Well, jihad is a peaceful struggle. Yes, there is the peaceful struggle in jihad. The Council on American Islamic Relations in the United States a few years back, they had a whole campaign. My jihad is getting to the gym regularly. My jihad is dropping off the kids at school on time, and this kind of nonsense. And of course, they never mentioned that in Islamic theology, it is true. Actually, just in the Arabic language and picked up in Farsi and the other languages that have been influenced by Arabic, you have struggle. That's jihad. And you can have all kinds of struggles. You know, in English, you could say there's a great struggle to defend civilization against savagery today. And you could also say, I'm struggling to lose weight or quit smoking or whatever. And that would be the same word, but it's one of them is a great struggle and one of them is a small one. It's the same thing in Arabic. You can have all kinds of struggles, jihads. The Islamic Republic of Iran has a Department of Agricultural Jihad. It doesn't mean going to the farm and blowing it up. It means trying to make the farm more efficient, to struggle on the farm. But in Islamic theology, Sunni and Shia, the primary meaning of jihad is warfare against unbelievers, the struggle against unbelievers to subjugate them under the rule of Islamic law. And so when they say jihad is peaceful, it's true, but they're only giving you part of the story, and they're intentionally misleading you by leaving out the rest.
Jihad fi sabilillah, that of course is explicitly violent.
That's it. That's the jihad that's against unbelievers. Jihad for the sake of Allah. Jihad fi sabilillah is the hot warfare against unbelievers. That's what we saw on Saturday in Israel.
A thought comes to my mind. It's like the word play. The English is a funny language. I'm trying to lose weight and I'm throwing my weight around. You know, it's something like that. So the point here is very important. And I'm looking at it from a perspective that how the tools are used, how the tools of democracy are used to subvert democracy. That's a matter of major concern.
Yes.
See, for example, yesterday I watched the Black Lives Movement co-founders talking about how they find the struggle. They didn't use the word jihad, but common struggle against oppression by Palestinians and the Black lives, the total driven by ignorance. So how does the civilized world contest that? Because I noticed one thing, and I just wanted to do that extra sentence, that when I was watching Prime Minister Netanyahu and Secretary Blinken talk, Secretary Blinken mentioned that he is also a Jew and he understands the pain and trouble, the struggles that he has been through. I find that they are trying to drive the wedge between America and Israel because they know that so long as America supports Israel, there is nothing they can do about it. America is very strong, very powerful. And therefore you see Ilhan Omars and Tlaib of the kind who are weakening American resolve from within by playing the vote bank politics. Your thought on it? Which all fits into the entire covenant that we are reading here.
Mm-hmm. And Tlaib and Omar, they're Muslims and they believe in all that. So they have no trouble really with Hamas. no reporter would ever ask them. I wish they would. It would be interesting to see what they would say if they were asked point blank, do you support Hamas? And probably they would start speaking about how oppressive the Israelis were. But they are indeed trying to undermine American support for Israel. They're trying to give the impression that if you're on the side of justice, then you have to support Hamas. And they are trying to make sure that the US does as little for Israel, if anything at all, as possible. It's very clear where their sentiments lie and what their allegiances are, but nobody ever confronts that directly for some reason.
Why not? There are so many Jewish people in Democratic Party and Republican Party. Republican Party, in all fairness, they have been unequivocal with reference to condemnation of the Hamas Act. Democratic Party has not been. As a matter of fact, these elements. By the way, I saw the video yesterday of a reporter running behind Tlaib and repeatedly asking, do you support Hamas? She didn't answer. She didn't answer to the entire passageway that she walked. It is a matter of concern. It's a matter of concern as an American. You can hold your free views and whatever you want. There's no doubt about that. But when you hold your free views to under my free views, then it is a kind of a matter of concern. And we need to worry about that.
Yeah, I have to commend that reporter. I had forgotten that when I was just saying nobody had confronted her. Well, this reporter certainly tried, and we saw why maybe some of the others don't even bother, because she won't answer. But even in not answering, that's an answer.
That's an answer.
Because if she could easily condemn Hamas, then why not? There's no political cost to condemning Hamas right now after what they did. But she knows there is a political cost for her, not in America at large, but in her district where it's full of Muslims and they love Hamas. But she doesn't want to call attention to that or let it be known in the larger population.
Right. But as you go down the charter, you have this interesting Article 14, which says 3 circles. And they say that there are these 3 circles. There's the Palestinian circle, the Islamic circle, and there is the Arabic circle. And the Palestine is bound to these 3 circles. And because it is the land of Allah, it has the Qibla, the Prophet ascended to heavens from here. Therefore, it is their land, and the only solution is to throw out the Jews from here.
This is just what happens all over the world, you know, all the Hindu temples that were destroyed and replaced with Islamic mosques, hundreds of them, if not thousands. And in Jerusalem, of course, you have the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount, where the Jewish temple once stood. And why were the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock built there? Well, the story is that's because Muhammad ascended to paradise there. Now, why did Muhammad ascend to paradise there? Well, there's a story in the Islamic traditions that only dates back to the 9th century. Muhammad is supposed to have lived in the 7th century. So this is 200 years later. 200 years later, you have a story that Muhammad was taken on a winged white horse with a human head to Jerusalem, that he flew on this horse from Mecca, where he was living, to Jerusalem. And from Jerusalem, from the Temple Mount, he passed into paradise and met the other prophets, and ultimately met Allah himself. Now that's the story. But in the first place, it's 200 years after Muhammad is supposed to have lived. It has no historical value. And even in the story itself, you have Aisha, his famous child bride, saying, he was here beside me sleeping all night. So at very best, if you think that the story is true, it's a dream. This man had a dream one night. That's it. And it's on the basis of that, and even that was concocted 200 years after the Arabs conquered Jerusalem. The Arab conquest of Jerusalem came first in the 630s. So you have this story, and that's supposedly the claim that the Muslims have forever to the Temple Mount and to Jerusalem. Now, really, it's patently obvious this whole thing was made up in order to justify the supremacy of the Muslims. That the whole story was fabricated in order to give the Muslims an enduring claim to Jerusalem. And they really don't have one any more than they have a claim to India or to anywhere else. There's no Islamic waqf anywhere. It's all just the assertion of Islamic possession of other people's land. And this is why the color of so many Islamic flags, like Pakistan's, is green. Why is green the color of Islam? Because Islam is in perpetual springtime. It's always growing. It's always expanding. And that's why it's green. But it's green at the expense of everybody else. It's as the result of the appropriation of the territories that have belonged to other peoples since time immemorial.
That's interesting. And what is the justification for reconquering India even after having got Pakistan?
Drive them out from where they drove you out. See, yeah. You see, there was India, there was the Mughal Empire.
That was with reference to Mecca.
I'm sorry?
That was with reference to Mecca.
Yeah, supposedly, sure, but it's an Islamic principle. The Quran, see, this is another thing that we always hear, that Muslims, if you quote passages like this, they'll say, oh, this only had to do with Muhammad fighting the pagan Arabs in the 7th century. It doesn't have anything to do with anything after the 7th century. I hear that all the time. And yet, just yesterday, I believe it was, or 2 days ago, Hamas issued a communique about the attacks, and it said, kill them wherever you find them, which is in the same passage, chapter 2, verse 191. Kill them wherever you find them, drive them out from where they drove you out. It's in the same in the Quran. Now, why is Hamas quoting that when Islamic apologists in the United States have told me hundreds of times, oh, that has to do with the 7th century. That doesn't have to do with now. It doesn't have any application in the modern world. And somehow Hamas didn't get the memo. And it's the same thing with all of these passages. They believe that the Quran is the perfect and eternal book that existed forever with Allah in paradise, and it applies to every age and every country. And so drive them out from where they drove you out applies to India as much as it applies to Israel. That if the Muslims ruled in India at one time, then it's Muslim land forever. And they have a responsibility before Allah to drive out the Hindus and to establish an Islamic state once again in India.
Wow.
So, Vibhuti ji, be careful.
You know, what I'm careful about.
Well, does that apply to US as well?
Yes. It doesn't necessarily apply in the sense of that they have to reconquer, because, of course, they never had this land. However, there have been efforts to give the impression that they did have this land. And there's a passage from Christopher Columbus's diaries where he says that when they saw the New World, they saw mosques.
Okay. So, the Western civilization is also an encroacher, that means.
Yes. Now, Christopher Columbus was saying that he saw buildings of that shape or rock formations. He wasn't talking about actual mosques, but there are Muslims who try to represent that as indicating that the original Native Americans who were here in 1492 were Muslims. Now, of course, there's nothing to this whatsoever, but sometimes you see it over the last few years popping up with Islamic apologists trying to claim that this was originally Islamic land. And they don't state the other implication of that, which means that it belongs to them now.
Now,
But
of
even
course,
if it's not the-
there is also this 7.128, which says that all land belongs to Allah.
yeah. And if you fight them until persecution is no more and religion is all for Allah, then ultimately, while you might have a priority list that includes the Muslim lands that you lost, like Israel and India and so on, it will also include all the non-Muslim lands that you never had, because you have to keep fighting as long as there are people whose religion is not all for Allah.
Yeah, yeah. That's right. It says that, and Moses said unto his people, seek help in Allah and endure. The earth is Allah's. He giveth it for an inheritance to those to whom he will, and the sequel is for those who keep their duty unto him.
Mhm.
Pickthall translation, 7.128.
So when you wage jihad, you can seize the property of the unbelievers. And this is not theft, because theft is forbidden. You steal, you get your hand cut off. But that's chapter 5, verse 38. But you can seize the property of the unbelievers in jihad warfare because the earth belongs to Allah and everything belongs to Allah. And so you're just taking it back from those who have stolen it.
Oh, indeed, yes. And 9.39 says that it is obligatory to fight the infidel.
They learn the lessons of life very quickly, legitimizing what is not your own.
But there's a problem. At least in India, there's a problem. That they don't understand Arabic and they don't really know Quran. So they get all their knowledge from the Friday sermons.
Mhm. And that is a problem, because that means that they are putting tremendous trust in the clerics, and the clerics can lead them wherever they want. And we've seen it over and over with Muslim clerics in India and in Pakistan saying these terribly incendiary things, and then the mobs go out and do what they're told, because this is also an Islamic principle. You obey the ruler, you obey the people who are in charge. And so they, not that they would be any less violent if they knew the Quran, because the Quran encourages all this, but they're very much susceptible to the orders of the clerics, because that's really all that they have to go on. It's kind of interesting because it's a common apologetic point for Muslims in the West. They say you cannot speak about the Quran unless you are fluent in Arabic. And this is just really designed to cover up the terrible things the Quran says. And you quote it and they say, oh, no, that's not an accurate translation. You have to understand the Arabic. But it's really just a dodge to avoid the uncomfortable aspects of Islam. And it sounds good to people who don't realize, well, wait a minute, any language can be translated. There's no language in the world that nobody can understand except those who speak it. The idea that these things can only be understood in one language would disenfranchise the Muslims of India, of Indonesia, two of the most populous Muslim countries in the world. Not that India is a Muslim country, but it's got one of the largest Muslim populations in the world. Pakistan, Iran, and so on, not Arabic countries. And so we're supposed to believe, apparently, that those people can't understand Islam.
That brings me to another question.
It's the principle of taqleed, that you have to only follow. You don't have to try and interpret yourself. You have to follow the cleric. And that also brings me to this point. You remember that we discussed about what the foreign minister of UAE said, that you don't really know how to, you don't understand these people. And they control them by controlling the clerics, by putting the fear of death on the clerics. They control the clerics, and through clerics, they control the public.
That's it.
Why can't the democracies do that?
And that's what I wanted to add here. This one is that the whole knowledge about doing the analysis, reading the translations, and the work to be done, is that the reason that the people are pushing the phobia laws so that you and I can't even talk like this, can't even discuss what is written in the text? Like if the phobia bill becomes a reality in America, and if the United Nations succeeds in making Islamophobia as a global thing, then where do we go from here to even to know? The freedoms are gone, the very basis on which we are able to talk and discuss. We are discussing, we are not filled with any hate. We want to say, what the hell is happening here, right? And that's our objective, to make things better for all of us. How does one contest that? How do you find their narrative controlling the entire democratic process, where people are bending backwards to accommodate their point of view to become inclusive and seen to be, all-inclusive, happy democracy? How does one deal with that?
The democracy is under tremendous threat these days. There's no doubt about it. There is an effort to silence dissent in the United States. We saw that with the arrests, the multiple arrests now of Trump, the multiple indictments. Whatever you think of Trump, this has never happened before in the United States, that the primary opposition leader was arrested and charged with various crimes, many of which seem to be quite flimsy in terms of the legal basis. It's clear that what we have is now a regime in the United States that is using the justice system to persecute its opponents and to silence them, and it wants to silence dissent. The whole Islamophobia fantasy was a precursor to all that the people who spoke the truth about Islam and jihad were stigmatized and silenced as Islamophobes. And even still, I'm on various lists that the US government and others consult, and people avoid talking to me and to others on the list because they're told that we are Islamophobic. And the word itself was made up in order to inhibit discussion of these things. The only thing I know to do in the face of that is to keep on speaking the truth and to keep on pointing out the contradictions in what they're doing. If Islam really were a religion of peace, then we would see it. For example, there have been demonstrations all over the world in favor of the Palestinians. Right after Hamas commits these horrific murders in Israel, where were the demonstrations of the Muslims in favor of Israel and against the atrocities? Why aren't they standing up and saying, wait a minute, Islam is a religion of peace? How could you have done this in the name of my peaceful religion? And they don't stand up and say that because, of course, it isn't true. And their religion does allow for this sort of thing.
Okay, I think time to go to the questions. We got a lot of questions. And before that, I remind everybody about the Jaipur Dialogues Summit, DFI Jaipur Dialogue Summit 2023. Please go to that QR, scan it, and support us. And also register yourself. And you can go to the website and watch all the details about the summit. Questions, please. Myself, okay. They planned way ahead, but few years global artists suddenly started posting about supporting Palestine. Civic infiltration started before.
Yes,
well, I think that's just...
You're quite right. This has been planned for years. As a matter of fact, this particular attack was planned for at least 2 years. A Hamas leader said that today. But also, this whole thing has been planned in a larger sense since 9/11, that there would be various efforts to influence public opinion. And that's why we now have the concept of Islamophobia and the concept of hate speech and so on. It's all designed to soften up resistance to the jihad. And then the next jihad happens and people say, well, the Israelis deserved it. They're so oppressive, which isn't even true to start with. But it's been a very sophisticated and successful propaganda campaign.
Yeah, right. Next. Avdesh Kumarji, thank you. Vibhuti ji.
Myself back again. A friend was giving hints about one-eyed Hamas for a year now. That's all for now. Be aware of demography change in West. Look at Niger and Panun issue. Thank you for the warning.
Do you? I don't know what that means, one-eyed Hamas.
That's it is talking about our good friend Trudeau and his handling of the situation with the assassination of that particular terrorist, whom he called an honorable Canadian citizen, a priest, a worker, a social activist.
Yeah, and Panun is a Sikh Khalistani who has threatened Hamas-type attack on India, just as it has happened in Israel. He has openly threatened in Canada. Talk about freedom of speech and the rule of law.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's certainly no doubt about it. I don't know about these other things, but the demography change in the West is also something that has been deliberately brought about and will have very far-reaching consequences, including increased jihad activity in the West.
Right.
Okay, next. Krishna Sundar, is the Gaza ground operation Israel's Battle of Iwo Jima?
We'll see.
Sorry?
We'll see.
It doesn't have the...
We don't know.
About that.
We'll see how it goes. They haven't entered ground troops yet.
Okay. Battle of Iwo Jima, of course, was a naval battle.
Yes.
Next. Vivek Daya, namaste. How do we handle our own jihadis that support Gaza from AMU and support Pakistan Hyderabad cricket game? When will the current government stop this appeasement, as they are not getting any votes from Muslims anyways in 2024? That's very much internal to India. Would you like to address it?
I don't know that I'm qualified. Probably one of you gentlemen would be better to answer it.
What do you say, Vibhuti ji?
Look, this issue has to be handled. And just as everybody is learning the Hamas covenant now, you never give up the attempt to gain for peace. Let's put it that way. I would not go as far as the government is doing appeasement. Yes, many people feel that way. Sometimes I also feel that way, that why are you trying to appease a group of people whose belief system is this? You know, it's like trying to convey a hyena into a vegetarian milk drinker. It's not happening. So understanding the narrative is very important. And I think your frustration is very much understood, and you are not alone in thinking the way you are thinking, Vivekji.
Okay, next.
Santosh Karkera. Flight 93 during 9/11 fought back with terrorists like warriors. 10/7 warriors fought back. Should all civilians be armed to protect their families?
Yeah. No doubt about it. Yes, they should. Yes. I'm all for that. That's one of the things that's happening with this regime, though, and trying to stamp out dissent, is to restrict the ability to bear arms on the part of law-abiding citizens. And so we'll just be here defenseless in the face of all the people that they've brought into the country, including criminals and terrorists and so on.
Okay, Abhi, next. Abhinath. Namaste, Robert ji. Just want to know the truth about the prospering of Jews that were kicked from Iberian Peninsula who settled in the Ottoman Empire.
Well, there's no doubt that when they were expelled from Spain, at the time of the unification of Spain and the final conquest of the Muslim lands in 1492, they settled in the Ottoman Empire. The idea that they prospered in the Ottoman Empire is wildly exaggerated. The Ottoman Empire enforced the rules of dimitude, which mandated a second status for the Jews as well as the Christians, and they were denied basic rights, subjected to various humiliating and discriminatory regulations. And so the idea that they had a wonderful, tolerant civilization that was proto-multicultural even, it's a historical myth. And here again, just as the Islamic apologists are very clever in saying it's a religion of peace, they're also very clever in rewriting history and showing history to be the time when you can encounter Muslims who are wonderful and tolerant and peaceful. Well, they weren't then and they aren't now.
Right. Next.
Anko, what should I as a Hindu girl do? I'm aware about ideology. I'm spreading it. I want a toolkit now. Actions. I will go down fighting.
And she wants a reverse toolkit.
Right. Yeah, I will.
Okay, we'll prepare it for you.
No, actually, there is a Hindu toolkit as well. I have that in my system here. I can share that with you, Sanjayji. You can put it across the website.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
Next.
Kiran Janre. Muslims say Quran says about killing non-believers and apostates is similar to what is written in Bible. How different is Christianity than Islam?
Yeah, the Christian Bible is made up of two parts. And the first part has accounts of God ordering the killing of non-believers in specific times and places. These passages are not considered and were never considered to be applicable to all believers for all time. They were only applicable to those people in these particular situations. And so there is not now and has never been any law mandating the killing of non-believers and apostates in Christianity. This is not to say that Christians have always behaved wonderfully. And not even to say that they never killed unbelievers and apostates. It's just never been part of the teachings of Christianity.
Okay, next. Rabindra, Robert, in your PBD podcast debate, you mentioned so many Islamic atrocities on Christian Jews, but not Hindus. So many Hindus support you.
Wow.
But you turned backstabber.
Harsh words, my friend. Rabindra, call me. We'll have lunch. Look, the situation is this. The PBD podcast, they got me and Rashid Hamami, who is a Christian, an ex-Muslim from Morocco. And then they had two Muslims on the other side. And so it was deliberately set up as two Christians and two Muslims. And so there was no backstabbing involved. The topic was about Christianity and Islam. That's what we were there to discuss. No slight was intended, I assure you.
I will join you for lunch, Robert. Let me know.
Rabindra seems to be in India. So
Yes.
Well,
he will have to pay for his passage first.
If you make it to Los Angeles, let me know and we'll have lunch. It's on me.
Okay.
Yes.
Next.
Abhinag, why do you think the Hanafi school in Sunni Islam allowed Sufi grave worship and collecting jizya tax from mushriks, Hindus in India, even though it was haram?
The Hanafi school has always been less stringent than the other schools of jurisprudence. And so where the others would say, kill the apostate, the Hanafis say, wait a few days and let them repent and then kill the apostate.
Small mercies.
The collection of the jizya from the Hindus was part of an accommodation that was necessary, that became clear very early in the Muslim conquest of Sind, because there were so many Hindus and they couldn't kill them all or convert them all. And so they got clerics to say, we'll treat them like the people of the book. It was an accommodation born of necessity.
Yeah, next.
Next.
Yeah, this is done. Next. Curious Prani. Jordan Peterson seems to think Islam is better than woke religion. What do you think?
I tend to think Jordan Peterson is not informed about Islam. More about Allah. He understands that he's dealing with something that is very dishonest and two-faced. And it's not what he thinks, because he's been talking to all these Islamic apologists who are desperately dishonest, Muhammad Hijab and so on. And he needs to understand that the idea of deception is very important to these people, and that he's not getting the whole story. Jordan, give me a call too. We'll have lunch with Rabindra.
All right.
Lots of lunch invitations going out today. I'm glad to hear that. Niladri. Future of India seems grim as Modi is siding with Islamic countries. Hindus will be minority then. Rather China looks more firm against the peaceful. What's your opinion? Thank you.
Like I say, I'm not really qualified to speak about Indian politics, but I do believe that China is being very harsh. I don't want to be in the position of approving that or having people think that this is some good course of action. The jihadis we oppose because they are violent and coercive. The Chinese communists are violent and coercive. I'm not in any favor of that either. I believe that the challenge of jihad has to be met in many ways. We have to meet the ideological challenge, we have to meet the spiritual challenge, and we have to be strong, certainly militarily, in various non-Muslim countries. But that doesn't mean committing atrocities of our own.
Right. Okay, Vibhuti ji, have a go.
Ustad Twitterdin Khan Chanchad. Robert, what do you think should be the approach for average non-Muslims to push back against wokeism in universities and corporate, which provides cover to radical Islam and leftist anarchism?
I got to say that Twitterdin, that's very good. Tweeting the religion, tweeting for Allah. Anyway, the average non-Muslims, it's just a matter of telling the truth wherever you are and whatever your situation is. The Islamic jihadis and the Islamic apologists, they work on intimidation. They want to frighten you into submission. And so you might not be in a place where you're in danger of being killed, but you're certainly in a place where you're in danger of being called a racist or a bigot or a hate monger. And you have to stand up and keep telling the truth no matter what. Most people fold just at being called names. And we have to be made of sterner stuff than that.
Next. Gyani. I was in Dubai. I met Saudi Arabs who are converted to Christianity. Do you think Saudi Arabia will become Christian nation in the future?
No. Maybe. No, you know, I say no, but then I think, well, anything, the history is full of surprises. So I suppose it's theoretically possible. Certainly, one thing you can say is there's a great deal of discontent in the countries that are fully Islamic and enforce Sharia. There's a great deal of discontent with Islam. There was a poll in Iran last year, I believe it was, that was extraordinary. Only 40% of the people would say they were Muslim. Now that's in the Islamic Republic, where 99% of the people are supposed to be Muslim. So what happened to the rest of them? They've been living under Islam for 40 years, and they've had enough of it. So they're not even saying they're Muslim anymore. And there are many Christians in Iran, also people returning to Zoroastrianism. And so I wouldn't be surprised if Saudi ceased to be an Islamic country sometime in the future.
Yeah, they say that 74% of mosques go unattended.
Yes.
Next.
Anurag. Hi, Robert. What strategy must the civilized world adopt to ensure that future generations of Muslims see Islam for what it is and then reject its teachings? I don't see a way democracies around the world can ban the Quran, even though it is one of the most dangerous books in the world.
I'm not in favor of banning the Quran. I'm in favor of the people reading the Quran.
Right.
And if they read the Quran, that's the best thing to do to ensure that future generations of Muslims will see Islam for what it is and reject its teachings. Because if you make it public, and a matter of public discussion that this is a book that endorses murder and rape and subjugation of people who are outside the fold, and slavery and beating your wife and all manner of terrible things, many people will think, oh, well, I don't want to be part of this religion, and they will leave. But most people in the West who are even joining Islam, they don't know anything about it. And so they think they're joining something that is different from what they're actually joining.
Okay, next. Abhinag. What's wrong with the
Hasidic.
Hasidic
I don't
Jewish
believe.
community?
Oh, I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the Neturei Karta. Neturei Karta is not the Hasidic Jewish community of New York City. The Hasidic Jewish community of New York City is made up of numerous different groups, and none of them support Hamas. But there is one group of Hasidic Jews, the Neturei Karta, and they reject Zionism. They believe that only the Messiah can start the state of Israel. And so they started the state of Israel without the Messiah, no good. So they actually have betrayed their own people and demonstrate against Israel. They've allied with Iran. They like Hamas. And I think these people are crazy, because if you are opposed to Israel, that's one thing. But to side with the people who will kill your own friends and family, your own kinsmen, that's treason. And that's not excusable in any context.
Next.
Global Pandemic Treaty, End of Sovereignty, Pandemned. Dr. Spencer.
What names?
I know. People are being really creative. Dr. Spencer, respect to your research. Why people are not researching astrotheology? They attacked after 6 and 6 hours later, 66 minutes later on Saturday.
I never heard the word astrotheology until this minute. And so I cannot.
Okay. Next. Krishna Sundar, why US policy uniting Russia, China, Iran, Saudi, and others?
Because the U.S. is run by a traitor class that wants to destroy the U.S.
You're quite right, actually. We might laugh about it, but you're quite right.
Yeah, he's right.
And we are concerned for the US. We are all concerned. All over the world, we are concerned about the direction that US is taking.
You are right. You are right, absolutely.
Next.
As the saying goes, if I were in the boxing ring with Muhammad Ali, I know he will pummel me. He will make a mincemeat out of me once he starts hitting me. My goal is only one. Somehow land a punch on his nose and make him bleed. That's my victory. That's what they are doing in America, the most strongest country. Weaken it where it matters. And that's the vote bank politics which is going on. Anyway, Pushamitra Shunga, what a religion where people kill each other for blasphemy, but never show anger for their Arab masters on saying these converted Muslims. Ghalis, Rafiq, and Al Hindi Miskin. Answer, please.
I don't understand the question. I'm sorry. Do you understand?
Well, what they're saying is that the Arabs use these cuss words. Ghalis is dirty, Rafiq is also,
gotcha. Okay.
And
Well,
Al Hindi. These are all pejoratives, actually, for
they're using unbelievers, right?
Indian Muslims. Yeah.
Indian Muslims. Oh, that's because Islam is a vehicle of Arab supremacism.
Right.
That's, you were just talking about Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali was an American from Kentucky named Cassius Clay, and he changed his name to an Arab name when he converted to Islam. Why? He wasn't an Arab. And there are converts to Islam all over the world who change their name to Arab names. Why? They're not Arabs, but Arabic is very much supreme in Islam. Arab culture, the Arab religion, you have to pray in Arabic, read the Quran in Arabic, and many of them even dress like 7th century Arabs. So the Indian Muslims, not being Arabs, they're second-class Muslims.
Okay, next.
Many people.
There is this theological principle called kufu, which actually sets out the hierarchy.
The Pakistani Muslims have often, it's been noted that they're so fanatical because they're trying to make up for not being Arabs.
Okay, next. JR. Hi, sir. Is this the right time for Israel to directly quote the Islamic scriptures in order to expose the intentions of Hamas terrorists?
It's always the right time for that, but nobody does it. Except us.
Next.
Duplicate parody. Earlier, Jihad was having year-wise all the attack incidents covered in that year, but can't find it now. Is data removed or any modification done?
No, it's still there. It's just not at Jihad Watch and never has been. I have it linked to Jihad Watch, but I did not originate this list. It comes from thereligionofpeace.com. Be careful not to leave off the. It's thereligionofpeace.com. And if you go there, you'll find the extensive, comprehensive list of over 40,000 jihad attacks since 9/11.
Next. JR. I personally feel that official leadership of Israel should quote Islamic scriptures like Hadith and Banu Qurayza to put a global ban on Islam.
So I'm all for quoting Islamic texts. I've been doing it myself for decades now. People need to know what's in them.
Next.
Ustad tweeted in again. It's addressed to Sanjay ji, you and I. It's private companies, sponsors of the World Cup, who are doing this whole welcoming of the jihadi-minded sportsmen, not the current Indian government. Unfair to accuse them of appeasement. Thank you for saying
Okay,
so.
Noted.
JR.
Yeah.
Difference between Islam and Christianity is that while Quran is considered as verbatim from Almighty Bible, is not for this very reason, not even one word can be falsified. I didn't get it.
Well, yeah, it is certainly true that the Islamic idea is that Allah dictated every word of the Quran, and it's the copy of the perfect book that existed in paradise. And Christians don't view the Bible like that. They understand there's a human element in it. That is part of the difference, but also the main difference is that Islam, the Quran says things like kill them wherever you find them, and the Christian Bible does not.
Okay, next. T-Seeker. It is said that when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, he heard namaz on the moon. Even moon belongs to Muslims.
Yes, that is something that is said. And I believe Neil Armstrong at one point had to issue an official denial because people were coming up to him and saying, Alhamdulillah, you have converted to Islam. And he would say, no, what are you talking about? And so it's just more of this fantasy that's designed to make Muslims feel better, but also to fool non-Muslims into thinking that the whole world is coming to Islam and they better jump on board.
Okay, next. RP.
Islam gaining in West only because liberalism, feminism, secularism made it weak, and who is pushing these in the West? Jews. So powerful, can't even type their name.
Oh, this is silly. There are some Jewish people who are leftists, feminists, secularists, and there are also some Jewish people who are opposed to all these things. And this kind of collectivist mindset is baseless, because even if you had all Jews doing these things, it's not as if this is some principle of the Jewish religion. This is just a diversion from the fact that there is a religion that actually calls for collective action for conquest, and it's not Judaism.
All right. Next. Kaushik 786. Democratic Blue Book is to replicate Yugoslavia in India in the pretext of Hindus repressing Muslims. Yeah, they are always oppressed. The play looks very similar. Your take on the warmongering Democrats?
The warmongering Democrats are the traitor class that I referred to before. They don't have the best interests of the United States at heart, much less of India. And so certainly they want wars because they profit from the wars. They sell weapons, they manufacture the material that is necessary. And so their profit motive is coming before the peace and stability of the entire world. This is why the United States has been involved in so many of these pointless conflicts that had no end and no resolution. It was just to line the pockets of the military-industrial complex.
Okay, next.
Ashish Nigam, what we can do about wokes cleverly, selectively mentioning Palestine when they want to avoid condemning Hamas atrocity in Israel?
Yeah, you're right. They're trying to fool people into thinking that they are not in favor of the Hamas atrocities, but they still are expressing their hatred for Israel. And we have to call them out on this and ask them, where are the Palestinians acting against Hamas? Where are the Palestinians standing up and saying, not in my name? Nowhere. As a matter of fact, Fatah, which is the great rival of Hamas, was fully in accord with the attacks and was cheering them on.
Right. What is this? Duplicate parody. Is the democracy a framework to paralyze country rather than governance framework? How to drive wokes, seculars, communists away from pillars of democracy?
I'm not quite sure what to make of that.
I think he's referring to the fact that democracy ends up being the threes: judiciary, executive, legislature. As a checks and balances, they end up doing nothing,
which would be quite welcome at this point. But, I suppose if you really want, you want concerted government action against a massive threat, then you would want a different system of government. But unfortunately, they all have their negative aspects, and there is no perfect governance in this world.
Okay, next. Nikhil, there were some accusations on brother of Obama for having links with Muslim Brotherhood back in 2012. What's your say on this?
Oh yeah, the Obama administration was completely in league with the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood, which is dedicated in its own words to eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within, made tremendous advances in the first two Obama administrations and now in the third one.
Yeah, it's the third one, right? Next.
Ustad Twituddin Pak again. Robert, don't the Muslim families read the Quran in depth? How come at least the Arabic speakers don't see through the Quran for what it really is?
Well, of course, when you're talking about Muslims in India or Pakistan or Iran or Indonesia or Afghanistan, for the most part, they don't know Arabic, and so they're just mouthing syllables. They're not reading the Quran at all. And so they're dependent upon, as we discussed before, the Muslim clerics to tell them what it's all about. Why don't the Arabic speakers say, this is disgusting, this is revolting, how could I believe this? Well, some do, and they leave Islam, but most of the time, they're too tied into the whole framework, that they don't want to lose their families, they don't want to lose their communities. Their entire frame of reference is based on Islam, so they might not even recognize how terrible, how horrific many of the teachings are, because they're constantly told all the time, this is the greatest wisdom, this is the greatest truth. And so they don't even read it critically.
Today, just as a sidelight, today there were some figures that were shown on Indian television regarding the support for Hamas in Muslim countries. And in Arabic-speaking countries, it was the least. That came as a surprise to me, at least.
Yes.
Sharvin Shelke, why doesn't someone ask Palestinian what did they expect? You can't expect to spit in a sleeping tiger's eye and then live to tell the tale. What part of the Israeli response did they not expect?
We probably didn't expect it to be as strong as it has been, because it never has been before. Israel declared war for the first time since 1973. And so that means that there have been innumerable Hamas attacks against Israel between 1973 and 2023 without this kind of response. And so they also saw how divided Israel has been with its own internal political controversies. So they thought they're divided and distracted. Maybe they won't do much of anything. And also they knew, as it was expressed in a Hamas communique, this is jihad to victory or martyrdom, that if they get killed, well, then they enjoy the virgins of paradise. And so it's a win-win situation anyway.
All right. Next. Dharati Putra, Israel is on Muhammad's path of killing every near and dear of ones who fight you. You also kill whole families of fighters of Banu Israel.
Yes, that's true. He did. And he's the excellent example of conduct, according to the Quran, chapter 30, verse 21. So,
perfect.
Yes, you imitate him, and that's what they did.
Yes, yes.
Pratik, hypothetical question, but will there even be an election in USA in 2024? They are suspecting a lot Palestinians have crossed the border. Do you see any threats?
Well, there was the big threat yesterday from Khalid Mashal of Hamas calling for a global day of jihad for Friday. And so we'll see if that develops into anything, or if he's just trying to frighten the unbelievers, strike terror in the enemies of Allah. But certainly, I think there will be an election in 2024 in the US. Whether it will be a free election or just a more massive voter fraud, that remains to be seen.
Just to add to that, Robert, I came across this data that the department released. It said that special interest alien apprehension in the US, this is just 2 days ago, max numbers of people came from Turkey, 30,830. There's precise number given. Then came Mauritania with 15,594. Third was Uzbekistan with 13,624. Fourth was Afghanistan, 6,386. Egypt with 3,153, and Pakistan with 1,613. These are the special interest alien apprehensions, with the word used. We are not even aware of how many gotaways. So the question was indeed very relevant as to what will happen. Is the process to disrupt the whole thing? But since the questions are over, I had one inquiry, and I wanted you to send you a message.
I do have one.
Okay, good. Then we both have one. Two things which have bothered me a lot. The Western credibility is an all-time low with reference to WMD failure and what have you, So the failure of CIA, NSA, French GDSE, Mossad, MI5, MI6, the Five Eyes, the Skynet, all that we have, human int, to not see this kind of an attack happening is mind-boggling. That's where the conspiracy theories come out. And second one is, what's the real relationship between Hamas and ISIS and the US, paralysis in reclaiming the $6 billion they supposedly gave for the settlement of hostages? This, which the Hamas and other people have figured out, that these democracies will give whatever it takes to save a life. Indian Airlines, Kandahar, we know that example. US is also a victim. They have caught on to that element. How does one deal with that?
Well, in the first place, this was a massive intelligence failure, and we don't know exactly what happened yet. I'm sure there will be a full investigation and more will come out. We heard the Iron Dome, for example, went out, and there's been no explanation of that. And so I hope that it's not the case that Iran figured out a way to get into the Israeli computers and disrupt it, but that may have been what happened. And this is very great, a disquieting sign of how vulnerable we all really are, because if the most sophisticated army in the world can be so caught short, then anybody can. But we don't know really what happened yet. I don't believe that the whole thing is, I don't believe the conspiracy theories that the whole thing is fake or something. I mean, it's quite obvious that Hamas exists and wants to kill Israelis, and so they did. But I don't know nobody knows what happened fully yet.
And any thoughts on ISIS-Hamas relationship?
Oh yeah, they're the same thing. They hold the same ideology. It's just that Hamas is directed toward Israel, and ISIS has a more general desire to establish a caliphate wherever it can. As a matter of fact, there was an ISIS flag that was found in southern Israel as a result of these attacks.
Okay, just one short question. I am quite surprised by the views of Nassim Nicholas Taleb. He comes from Lebanon. His family was very, very powerful. I think now they have had to leave Lebanon. And he seems to be quite sympathetic to the Palestinians rather than the Israelis.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with him, but is he a Christian Arab?
He's a Christian. He's the Antiochian Greek descent.
Okay, a lot of the Christian Arabs in the Middle East, they are completely co-opted and accept the Islamic point of view on anything regarding Israel and many other issues as well. And this comes from the subjugation of dhimmitude. Over centuries, the Christians in Lebanon, the Christians elsewhere, were subjugated as second class under the rule of the Muslims. And they knew that if they complained, it would get even worse. So every time you ask them, they would say, oh, the Muslims are wonderful and everything is great here. And none of it was true or ever true, but they knew they had to say that to survive. And over time, this led to their adopting the point of view of the Muslims. And so they're identified as fellow Arabs with the Muslims. And so this is considered to be an Arab cause against Israel. The Christian Arabs are on board for the most part.
Okay. And so we will now wind it down, though while we were talking, some more questions have come up, but I'm sorry, we'll not be able to take them now. So thank you, all viewers, and thank you, Robert. Thank you for sparing your time, and it was wonderful as always. And thank you, Vibhuti ji.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you
all. Good night from here.
Good night.